The one pervading evil of democracy is the tyranny of the party that succeeds by force or fraud in carrying elections. Bingo, that's it. And then in Scotland, there was a history professor who taught at the University of Edinburgh. His name was Alexander Tyler, and I thought he had the best summary of the whole thing. He said, quote, "A democracy is always temporary in nature. It simply cannot exist as a permanent form of government. A democracy will continue to exist up until the time that voters discover that they can vote themselves generous gifts from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always vote for the candidates who promise the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that every democracy will finally collapse due to loose fiscal policy, usually followed by a dictatorship." End quote. And that is why the Founding Fathers were against a democracy. And so when we hear this phrase that, you know, for the greater good of the greater number, we're kind of responding to this instinct that we have that, well, what's wrong with the greater good of the greater number? Isn't that the highest ideal? Well, it's not really when you think about it. Because think of a lynch mob, for example. Now, this is pure democracy in action. There's only one dissenting vote. So what's wrong with that? Well, wait a minute, that forces us back to the thinking pad again. Well, the thing that's wrong with that is that the group is not superior to the individual. The individual has rights that stand against the group, no matter how big the group it is. And it makes no difference how many people want that guy hung, depending on the system you live in and the culture you live in. In our culture, we say that every man, regardless, is entitled to a fair trial by a jury of his peers, and that you just can't take a show of hands and say how many want this guy dead and how many don't. So the difference then between a republic and a democracy is delicate, it's subtle, but it's extremely important. A democracy believes that the majority should rule, period, end of discussion. In a republic, the concept is that the majority should rule up to the point where it violates the rights of an individual, and that the individual is supreme against the majority when it comes to the individual rights. Now, this whole thing comes down to a sort of a mind game. I had trouble with it for the longest time because we get the idea that numbers count somehow, that somehow the rights of 10 people are greater than the rights of one people, and because they're a group, and it's a mathematical concept. I had trouble with that. But here's something to ponder. The group doesn't even exist. What is a group? Can you see a group? No. You can't see a group. You can only see people, individuals. It's like the word forest. Forest does not exist. Only trees exist, really. You can't touch a forest, but you can touch trees. You can't see a forest, but you can see trees. And this word group and the word forest, those words are mental abstractions. They're mathematical concepts. They're not real. They're the figments of the imagination. They're not real. And when we say that something that is not real, it's just an abstraction, has rights that are superior to something that is real, like an individual, we've made a terrible blunder, because that means that some tyrant can come along, some politician can come along with rhetoric about the people, and everybody's charged up, yeah, the group, and that tyrant says, I represent the people. I represent the party. I speak for the party. I speak for the group. And all of a sudden you're back to tyranny again, and the people are saying, yeah, it's okay. I guess it's okay because I voted and this is a democracy. That's the trick. The group doesn't really exist at all. And when you think that all the way through, you come to the amazing conclusion that the greater good for the greater number is accomplished only by preserving the rights of the individual. Once you do that, that is the greater good of the greater number. Thank you. Okay, I have to move along. I'd like to talk more about that, but we come finally to a third very important demarcation between individualists and collectivists. And that is that collectivists don't really believe in freedom. They talk about it, but they don't believe in it. They don't think that people can be trusted, that they're too damn dumb to know what is best for them. And if you give them freedom to act, they're going to make terrible mistakes. And so we who have been to school, we who are the philosopher kings, we who understand these things, we who are trained as the elite, we who know how to run things, we should make the decisions for them, and they better follow our will because it's for their own good. And we will force them to do that. And so collectivists believe in force. They believe that if something is good, people should be forced to do it. And individualists believe if something is good, well, they should be encouraged to do it, but not forced to do it. They should have freedom of choice to make mistakes. I think one of the best examples is the seatbelt law. Can you imagine anything more stupid than a seatbelt law? Collectivists say, well, you know, seatbelts are important. If you don't wear your seatbelt, you could have an accident, and you could be injured. You might even get killed. Seatbelts are very good. Therefore, let us pass a law, and by golly, if you don't wear your seatbelts, you dummy, we're going to put you in jail. I have a friend, a very close friend. He's got that mentality. You can always spot a collectivist. If he has disfavor with something, somebody throws a cigarette on the sidewalk, he says, there ought to be a law. That's his immediate reaction. There ought to be a law to make everybody do what is right. Individualists say, okay, seatbelts are a good idea. I have seatbelts. I wear seatbelts. And I think people should wear seatbelts. If they don't wear them, they're stupid. But I'm not going to force them under threat of law to do it. I may contribute to an educational campaign to convince them. I may, most of all, show by personal example that I wear my seatbelt, and by example, show other people how to do things, but I'm not going to put people in prison and use force against them. Very important distinction between these two groups of people. Move on. Number 4, very important, property rights are human rights. Collectivists do not believe that humans have any right to property at all. They think that because it is limited in quantity, it's part of the commons, and we meet in a building that's called the Commons and so forth. It reminds me of that. But yeah, they believe that humans should not have property. All collectivist systems have that belief. Why? Because if humans are allowed by the state to have property, they tend to be independent. You take away a person's property, and they cannot survive without charity from some source. And what's that charity source going to be? The state. All collectivist systems want their people completely dependent on them, the state, for sustenance and for survival. They want to tell them where to live, what kind of food they can grow, everything about them, and they cannot do that if people are allowed to have personal property. And that is why all collectivist systems are opposed to private property, and why all individualists instinctively know that private property is a human right. And we don't have time to go into that, but there's a lot to be said in favor of that. It's an instinct. One of the best books I recommend that you read is called The Territorial Imperative. It's a beautiful book on biology and how all the species of the world have this, most all of them, have this instinct for property and possession of territory and so on. It's just built into us, and it's there for a good reason. You take that away from them, and the species just withers. It just doesn't know how to act. It even loses its mating instinct, believe it or not. And if you deny many species the right to their territory, they don't mate anymore. And it's part of us. It's a natural process. And when you think it through, you realize that only people who are allowed to own property are the ones who will take care of property. And so they're the only ones who are good stewards of property. And those who argue that we must have the state take care of all property so we can preserve the environment, and all that stuff, they're on the opposite side of logic, because only people who are responsible for their property take good care of it. The welfare renters do not take care of their apartment as well as those who are paying for their own property. It's as simple as that. Okay, move on. Number 5, we're back to the Federal Reserve. Money without coercion. I said a moment ago that the Federal Reserve was the funding mechanism for collectivism. If you gave people the choice of what money they would like to use between, let's say, Federal Reserve notes and gold coins, what do you think most people would eventually wind up using? Duh. You know, as the value of those paper things keeps going down, 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 and yet the value of those shiny little things keeps holding its value and maybe going up, up, up. There will be very few people wanting to use Federal Reserve notes. And, of course, the collectivists in government know that. And that's true in all societies, all collectivist systems, which is why every one of them must have a system based on coercion. They call them legal tender laws. By legal tender laws, you are forced, under pain of punishment, to accept the state's money, no matter what it is, no matter how bad it is. You must do it, or you go to prison. And so there's another distinction. Individualists believe that we should have the freedom to choose whatever we want to for money or barter. If we want to use Federal Reserve notes, fine. If we want to use what do they call those things? The blue chip stamps. Remember, you used to say blue chip stamps. You go down and buy some chairs and things. We did that in our, man, we use those blue chip stamps like money, you know. If you want to use Disneyland tickets for money, fine, go do it. It's your choice. And if you want to use gold or silver, I think that's probably what you'll wind up using over a period of time. But so there is another important distinction, and any individualist, after thinking about these choices, will gravitate instinctively to freedom of choice with money. Number 6, now we've left the realm of specifics and we come to things which are more like catch-alls. Everything up to this point are very specific to a topic, but there are certain gray areas in any political discussion where you think, well, maybe this and maybe that. There's an overlap. And so there are two categories here that are used like baskets to pick up the loose ends. And one of them is equality versus inequality under law. Now, we all go through the motions of saying we think everybody should be treated equally under the law, right? Anybody hear any politician ever say that people should be treated unequally under the law? They wouldn't ever say that. But 99.99999% of our laws treat people unequally under the law. Every one of them. I can't think of any that doesn't. Because we're all trying to accomplish some kind of a social objective. We're trying to redistribute wealth or give somebody an advantage. Somebody pays a politician under the table and says, I want a tax loophole. We've got deductions for this and exemptions for that and refunds for this. And the whole system is built upon inequality under law. And people don't realize that they're voting for that. Why? Well, sometimes they do, but that's because they think they're going to benefit from it, that they're going to get more out of it than they put into it. And let me assure you, it doesn't work that way. You never get more out of this, unless you're a crook. You know, if you're at the top, you probably get more out of it than you put into it. But the taxpayers and the inflation payers at the bottom level never get more out of it than they put into it. So the idea that collectivism is always built upon the deliberate concept of inequality. They're trying to change some natural system. They're trying to benefit some group because it has merit in most cases. They say, well, this group is poor. They need to be supported. So therefore, the ones with the money have to give it to the ones without the money. Notice I said have to. Now, if they said they should, that would be individualism. But no, they never say they should. They say they have to, and we will take it from taxes, and we will administer it, take our cut out of the middle, of course, and then give it to the poor after we get our share. And so there you have. When you look at all the laws that are proposed by collectivists, they are based on inequality application, unequal application of the law in some way. Individualists understand that the only basis for a really free and just society, and that word was used earlier today. I was really glad to hear it, that the word just was used, because there's that instinct in all of us. It's not just equal. That's fine, but how do you measure equal? You know, sometimes you get into that gray area.